Good morning. Today is the 28th of Av and the 15th of August. 28th of Av is not known so much, but it is, according to Gematria, it's known as the birthday of the Maggid of Mezritch. And the reason that it's the birthday I said according to Gematria. How do we figure that? Because there's a verse that says Panim el Panim, Diber Hashem Elokechem itchem. Panim is equal to Chai Elu. Then there's Panim el Panim.
Why is Panim?
Panim equals Chai Elu. That's what it's equal to.
Go ahead. Okay.
And El, there's only one date in the year that's equal to El. Aleph Lamed. 31. Kaf Chet Av. So we have Panim Chai Elu. Kaf Chet Av, Chai Elu. So what does that remind you of? The Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid, and the Alter Rebbe. So according to Gematria, Kaf Chet Av is, we don't know the Maggid's birthday. This is the closest we can come to knowing it. Okay. We're back to the very important difference between recognition and consciousness, or knowledge and consciousness. I think yesterday I used knowledge and consciousness. In either case, this touches upon what was maybe the most important sugya, the most important issue in Chassidus, in Chasidic philosophy. We've talked about it many times. You won't be surprised by it. You talk about it a lot. Etzem v'itpashtut versus he'elem v'gilui. Etzem v'itpashtut meaning the thing in and of itself and its appearances and how it appears to us, its revelations. That's etzem v'itpashtut. And then there is the he'elem v'gilui, something that is concealed and revealed. And the difference between these two things. So, for instance, no, it's not at the same time. It's either this or that. Etzem and itpashtut can be at the same time, but he'elem v'gilui can only be subsequent times. What's the idea? The idea is that many things that the sages talk about in Gemara you can't understand until you understand this basic difference between some object having a way to expand, to extend within space in some way, and therefore to move from one place to another, but the object itself stays put, and we'll give an example in a second, versus an object being concealed and then being revealed. So for instance, that's why I brought out the Siddur with Dach, because the Middle Rebbe, and this is actually something that's in this week's Hayom Yom. On Thursday, he's going to mention the Mimer where the Middle Rebbe discusses this in length. An example of Etzem v'itpashtut is a candle and the light that it emanates. So the candle, the flame, is the Etzem, is the thing in and of itself, and this thing in this case radiates. Right? It radiates light.
What's wrong with the sun?
The sun is also an example of that. There's 5 different examples that he gives for Etzem v'itpashtut in this Maimer. We're not going to go over all of them. That's another one of them. Another one that he gives is water moving from one place to another. Okay, he's not talking about water that's disconnecting from its source, but rather water that is connected to its source, like a stream, where the water is coming out of the ground and it's distributing.
So the same thing about what you're doing right now.
So is speech etzem v'itpashtut, or is it he'elem v'gilui? That's always a question. Am I just revealing something that was concealed before? For instance, when we talk about mathematics, so mathematics is a great candidate for he'elem v'gilui, for something that was concealed and now it becomes revealed. Meaning, there were laws of triangles even before I knew them as a child. And when I studied trigonometry and I realized there were laws of triangles, so it became revealed in my mind. But is that what we would call a hitpashtut? Is that an extension of the laws? Meaning, is there like an extension of trigonometry that's now entered into my mind? So most people would say no, that it's just a revelation of something that already existed anyway. Meaning, so that's basically Plato's theory of mimesis, that everything that we understand, we basically recollect. Mimesis is a bad word, really. The real word should be, we reveal. It's always been there. There's nothing new about it. It was just concealed. And now, right, he has a famous dialogue in which he teaches a slave there in Athens. He teaches him trigonometry or something like that. Well, not trigonometry, but geometry. In any case, so now he comes and says that when the patriarchs knew God, it wasn't what you think it is. Okay, now he's going to explain exactly what, and Reb Hillel was very, very big on this topic, because in the first, it's very interesting, the first 3 generations of Chabad, this was one of the main topics of study, the difference between Etzem Itpashtut and He'elam V'Gilui. And the reason we discussed this, if you remember, is that I said that when the Alter Rebbe moved to Liadi, after his second incarceration, he stayed for 6 months in St. Petersburg still, until he moved to Liadi. That was either the first or second long mimer that he taught. and he saw that as a basis for explaining what the Baal Shem Tov meant in the first place. He saw this as a basis for understanding all of Chassidus. So let's see what he says. וזהו כמו שפרש רש"י, זה לא הודעתי אין כתיב כאן אלא לא נודעתי. Rashi says, God says to Moses, I did not tell them, I did not reveal to them my name Havaya, right? So Rashi says, lo hodati en ktiv. It's not that I didn't tell them about it, but I did not become known. Right? I did not become known that way. Meaning, in other words, that it could be that there's a difference between telling someone something and him revealing it himself. Lo nodati means lo nikarti. I did not become
aware,
conscious, right? I didn't enter their consciousness b'midat amitit sheli, in my measure of truth. What's God's measure of truth? That He promised them the land of Israel, and He never fulfilled the promise. It was still waiting for it to be fulfilled, and they didn't think badly, poorly because of it. They didn't think poorly of me. They continued to serve me and believe in me. So I didn't reveal my measure of truth. Truth really means fulfillment. I didn't fulfill the promise that I gave them. Now, what is the difference? Ki al derech hapashut. The simplest way to understand this is like this: the hevdel ben geder yediah legeder hakara. The difference between knowledge and consciousness. Shayediah nofel b'itpashtut hadavar. That knowledge is what we call the extension of the thing in and of itself. But consciousness is of the thing itself. So, going back to our example of the candle and the light that it emanates, that it radiates, knowledge would be coming in contact and understanding that there's light here, but consciousness would be to know that there is a source to the light, which is called the flame on the candle. So that's what it would mean. So in other words, he's saying, lo nodati means that they did not see the extension. They did not see the radiance. K'mo evdel, so he's going to give here a different example. This is also one of the examples that's brought in Zecher Avtu Chayabiu, in that mimer from the Alter Rebbe and then from the Middle Rebbe. K'mo evdel sheben siman letviat ayin. There's a halacha in Baba Metzia that if you lose something and you want it back, you have to give signs. You have to say, it had this on it, and it had that sign on it, it had this sign, and so on, and then the person who found it can give it back to you. But, what if you're a Talmid Chacham? If you're a Talmid Chacham, you just have to say to the person, show me the object, and you can say, it's mine. Why? So he says, the Talmid Chacham has Tviyat Ayin. What?
doesn't lie.
That's not what it says. That's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara doesn't say it's because the Talmid Chacham, because the scholar is more trustworthy. That's not what it says at all. It says because the scholar has Tvi'at Ayin. Tvi'at Ayin is he has recognition. He has consciousness. Meaning here what we'd call it consciousness of what? Of the object itself. Meaning that when I tell you signs that are on the object, I'm giving you examples of what radiates, of what I see in the object. So a little bit like what we discussed many times regarding signs, that signs can only deal with the instrumental appearance of reality. It can't deal with reality itself. We can never touch reality itself. We're touching reality through our instruments, and those are once removed, always. So if we're measuring something in the heavens, so we don't know, we've never been to a star. That was exactly the problem that we had with, by the way, I have to tell you this. This is an incredible pshat that I saw over our break when I had to learn something when we were vacationing. So I was reading a book, and he says, what does it mean when we bless the moon, כשם שאני רוקד כנגדך ואני יכול לגוע בך, כך לא יוכלו כל אויביי לגוע בי לרעה. Well, what is that? What do you mean? In the same way that I dance before you, the moon, and I can't touch you, so my enemies won't be able to touch me. What is that doing there even? So there's this book called Sefer HaBrit. He writes that every mitzvah has a segula for something. Every mitzvah does something in the world. What does the mitzvah of the new moon do? It protects you from enemies. What? It protects you from enemies. I don't know where you got that. But what we say, it could be. But what we say is that this is a protection from my enemies. And so when we say I can't touch you, it doesn't mean I literally can't touch you. It's like saying my enemies can't touch me. No, I don't mean that you can't touch me. Of course you can touch me. The point is you can't harm me. So in the same way that I cannot harm you, so my enemies won't be able to harm me. So that's the pshat of that statement, and saying that there's a segula, there's an effect to every mitzvah. It's a very interesting thing in and of itself. But anyway, getting back to the point. So we can't touch nature. We only approach it. We only measure it. We can't actually manipulate it. Okay. That's how science works. Technology is a little bit different. That's why you have to separate between science and technology, which, by the way, was the ancient difference between, for instance, philosophy and magic. That thought doesn't touch the things themselves, it only thinks about them, doesn't touch them. It's only in the itpashtut, in the radiance, in the extension. But magic was supposed to be the manipulation of the object itself. Technology today is the manipulation of the object itself. It's unlike science. Science can only touch or come in contact with the extension, but not the object itself. So anyway, getting back to this, that the sign that I give if I lost an object, that's only the predicates that define what the object looks like externally. That's hitpashtut. That is the extension of the object. V'atviat ayin that the Talmid Chacham has. The how would you say tviat ayin? It's like the recognition. The recognition that the Talmid Chacham has, that the sage has, that the scholar has in the objects that he owns. Hu chakikat etzem hadavar kmo shenitztaer be'atzmut hanefesh. It's how the object itself was engraved in my soul, and that's why he can. Because a scholar wants to touch not only the predicates, not only the appearances of the object, he wants to connect with the object itself. That's the difference between a Talmid Chacham and someone who's not. That's the main difference. A Talmid Chacham is someone who wants to get down to the object itself. He wants to get down to the issue itself. He doesn't want to talk about everything that's around it. He doesn't beat around the bush. He wants to get to the point. It's called catching the bull by the horns. You want the bull itself. If you're talking about some sugya, some issue in Talmud, you're not just interested in the discussion. Most of the people, all they can do, again, because that's a first approximation. It's very important. All they can do, though, is understand the dialogue. They can understand the discussion, but they find it hard to go to the next stage, which is what in the world are the sages actually talking about? I'm not saying that there's some hidden meaning there. I'm saying that even to understand under a legal discussion, what is the issue, what is the real issue at hand that requires penetration into the depth of the topic. And so then you're touching the object, that's what you're looking for. So a scholar, he's used to not looking at this as, you won't say the book is red and it has golden engraved writing on it. he sees this for what it is, meaning this is the writings of the Mittler Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe. He sees the whole book in a completely different way. He grabs the object. Again, it's relative. We're not saying that he has some kind of special ability that we don't, that he can grab the object itself. We're all touching only the appearances of the object.
The Maggid could look at something, and by looking at it, he could know
Right,
who
so
created it.
right, you could know things about the person who made
Or
it.
if he sees it now, he can recognize what
Right,
he
because
saw
he goes
before.
down to the deeper object in this object that he's looking at, the deeper essence. ולכן הסימן יכול לגלותו בדיבור, אף כשאין החפץ בפניו. But there's something different between the scholar and the regular person who's coming to find something that they lost. That the scholar has to have the object in front of him. In other words, he might not remember that it's red. He has to see the object itself. Oh, this is the object. He might not remember. He might not be able to tell you, this is how it appears. This is its image. That he might not be able to tell you. On the other hand, there's a greater, there's an advantage to the person who's a simple person, that he doesn't have to have the object in front of him. He just says, the guy can say, oh, I don't have it here. I can't check, but I'll go home and look. You can tell him, oh, it's red and it has golden letters and it says Tfilot Mikol Hashana. That's what it is. He can say a lot of things about it, and the object doesn't have to be in front of him because he's dealing with the appearances, the external appearances. מה שאין כן טביעת עין אי אפשר לגלות בשום אופן בדיבור, כי אם כשהחפץ הוא בפניו יכול להכירו, והוא בדרך הכרה כללית בציור כוח המדמה שלמעלה מהתחלקות אותיות המחשבה והדיבור. The טביעת עין, the person who has recognition, he has to have the object in front of him, and these are things that even cannot be described. What he feels towards the object, the way that he recognizes the object, is completely different. We gave the example once. I think you remember this. The Rebbe Rasha brings this in Eter as one of the examples of hakarat etzim, of knowing the object in itself. He says you see your friend from really far away, where there's no chance that you could see his face, and yet you recognize him. There's no he's wearing whatever he wears every day. He wears something different. You don't know him by his clothing. You can't see his face, and yet you know that it's him. He says that's an example of hakara. That's an example of recognition.
People
From behind, for instance.
Oh, can you do
Yeah, everybody does. To some extent, everybody has this. So there he says it's a matter of being with someone with such a relationship that your relationship with them is not external. It's not the itpashtut. It's not the extension of the person that you're in a relationship with. You're in a relationship with the person himself, and therefore you recognize him even if you can't recognize any of his features. And that's a good word to use to understand the difference between features and the object itself. Just one more, just a parenthesis. כידוע שלגבי מי שחסר כוח המחשבה והדיבור כמו בבעלי חיים, כוח המדמה נחשב אצלו לפחיתות, מאחר שלא נתברר בהתחלקות כוח המחשבה והדיבור בחסרון כוח השכל, אבל בבעל שכל ומחשבה ודיבור, אז כוח המדמה והמצייר אמיתי דבר מושכל, כמו שהוא נחשב למעליותו, שהוא כוח הדעת דווקא, כמבואר במקום אחר. Now he says there's a difference between someone who doesn't have thought and speech like an animal. An animal doesn't have thought and speech, but it has imagination. In that person, in that animal, the imagination is weak. But in a human being who has thought and speech, imagination is an asset. Okay? It's an asset. Why? Because it comes to supplement what you are already connected to at a deeper level. Meaning, in other words, that if I, for instance, look at this object for a few days, once, twice, 3 times, and I remember that it's red, So then when I conjure up, somebody asked me, so what was the color of this book? And I said, it was red. So that supplements my connection with it already. But by the animal, the red doesn't mean anything. It's not it doesn't go together with the object itself. So we'll have to end and talk more about this tomorrow.